The November wind cut through downtown Seoul like a blade, carrying the scent of approaching winter. Alexander Kim pulled his cashmere coat tighter as he stepped out of his executive sedan. The Thanksgiving gala behind him, already a distant memory of forced smiles and corporate pleasantries. His driver had taken an alternate route due to traffic, leading them through a neighborhood Alexander rarely saw. One where the city's gleaming facade gave way to weathered buildings and narrow alleys. As CEO of Kim Industries, Alexander lived in a world of boardrooms and penthouse views where problems were solved with signatures and strategies. At 35, he had built an empire from his father's modest electronics shop, but success had come at a cost. The loneliness that followed him like a shadow had become his most faithful companion. The sedan's headlights swept across the alley as they turned, illuminating two small figures hunched over a row of garbage bins. Alexander's breath caught. Children, in this cold, on Thanksgiving night. "Stop the car," he commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. His driver hesitated. "Sir, we should... Stop, now!" The children looked up as the car door slammed, their faces pale moons in the darkness. A boy and a girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, clutching each other with the fierce protectiveness of those who had learned too young that the world could be cruel. Their clothes were clean but thin, inadequate armor against the biting cold. Alexander approached slowly, his expensive shoes clicking against the wet pavement. The twins watched him with eyes too old for their faces, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. In that moment, something inside Alexander's carefully controlled heart began to crack. "Are you hungry?" Alexander asked softly, crouching down to their level. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. The girl stepped protectively in front of her brother, chin raised in defiance despite the tremor in her small frame. She reminded Alexander of a kitten he'd once found as a child, all bravado masking desperate vulnerability. The boy peered around her shoulder, his thumb finding its way to his mouth. "We don't take things from strangers," the girl declared, her voice carrying an accent Alexander couldn't quite place. Her Korean was perfect, but there was something else underneath, like a melody played in a different key. Alexander nodded respectfully. "That's very smart. My name is Alexander Kim. What are yours?" Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the soft whistle of wind through the alley. The girl's eyes darted to her brother, some silent communication passing between them. These children had learned to speak without words, a language born of necessity and survival. "I'm Maya," she finally said, her small hand finding her brother's. "This is Lucas." Foreign names. Alexander filed this information away, his business mind automatically cataloging details even as his heart ached at their obvious hunger. Dark circles shadowed their eyes, and he could see the careful way they moved, conserving energy like small animals in winter. "Maya and Lucas," he repeated gently. "Beautiful names. Are your parents nearby?" The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Maya's jaw tightened, and Lucas pressed closer to his sister. In their silence, Alexander heard volumes, loss, fear, and a terrible learned self-reliance that no child should possess. "We live with Miss Sarah," Maya said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's sick." Alexander's heart clenched. A pattern was emerging, one he recognized from his own charitable foundation's reports. Single caregiver, probably overwhelmed, possibly unable to work. Children left to fend for themselves while their guardian fought battles they couldn't understand. "Where is Miss Sarah now?" he asked, fighting to keep his voice calm and unthreatening. "Hospital," Lucas spoke for the first time, his small voice muffled by his thumb. "She couldn't wake up this morning." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Their caregiver, perhaps a relative, perhaps just a kind soul who had taken them in, was hospitalized, leaving the twins alone on one of the coldest nights of the year. They had come here not out of choice, but out of desperation, searching for anything that might sustain them. Alexander's phone buzzed with messages from his assistant about tomorrow's meetings, but the outside world felt suddenly irrelevant. He looked at these two small faces, at the way Maya's hand trembled despite her brave front, at the trust beginning to bloom in Lucas's eyes. "I have an idea," Alexander said carefully. "There's a warm restaurant just a few blocks from here. They make excellent soup. Would you like to come with me, just to eat, and then we can figure out how to help Miss Sarah?" Maya's defenses wavered. Alexander could see the internal battle playing out across her features, stranger danger warring with the very real needs of two hungry, cold children. The weight of responsibility she carried for her brother was evident in every protective gesture, every careful calculation behind her young eyes. "You promise we can see Sarah after?" she asked, her voice small but determined. The restaurant Alexander chose was a small, family-owned establishment that stayed open late, the kind of place where steam clouded the windows and the smell of comfort food wrapped around you like an embrace. The elderly owner, Mrs. Park, took one look at the twins and immediately began bustling around, bringing extra blankets and hot tea without being asked. Alexander watched as Maya and Lucas thawed under the gentle warmth, both literally and figuratively. Color returned to their pale cheeks, and slowly their story began to emerge. Sarah Chen was their foster mother, a young woman barely 25 who had taken them in 6 months ago when their previous placement had fallen through. She worked 2 jobs to support them, cleaning offices at night and serving at a cafe during the day. "She makes us breakfast every morning," Lucas said, his eyes bright with love, "with faces on the pancakes. And she reads to us before bed," Maya added, her protective shell cracking to reveal the child underneath. "Even when she's really tired." Alexander felt something twist in his chest. Here was a young woman, probably not much older than his own assistant, who had opened her heart and home to 2 children who weren't hers by blood but were clearly hers by choice. And now she was lying in a hospital bed while they scrounged for food in alleyways. "What happened to your parents?" Alexander asked gently, though he suspected the answer would be difficult. Maya's face shuttered again, but this time Lucas answered. "Car accident. In America. We came here to live with our grandmother, but she got sick too." The pieces of their stories scattered like puzzle fragments across Alexander's mind. American-born children, probably of mixed heritage given their features and names, orphaned and sent to live with family in Korea who had also been unable to care for them. The system had failed them repeatedly, but somehow Sarah Chen had not. Seoul National Hospital buzzed with late-night activity, but Alexander's status as a major donor opened doors that might have remained closed to others. He walked through the corridors flanked by Maya and Lucas, their small hands clean now, their stomachs full, but their eyes bright with worry for the woman who had become their world. Sarah Chen was smaller than Alexander had expected, her frame lost in the hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped rhythmically in the sterile room. Even unconscious, her face carried the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. She was beautiful in the way that youth and kindness could make anyone beautiful, but there was a fragility to her that made Alexander's chest tight with protective instincts he didn't fully understand. "Sarah," Maya whispered, climbing carefully onto the chair beside the bed. "We brought help." Dr. Kim, the attending physician, pulled Alexander aside while the twins talked softly to their unconscious guardian. "She collapsed from exhaustion and malnutrition," he explained quietly. "She's been working herself to the bone, probably skipping meals to feed the children. Her body just gave out." Alexander absorbed this information like a physical blow. This young woman had literally been giving everything she had to care for two children who weren't even legally hers, sacrificing her own health in the process. The nobility of it was staggering, and it made his own comfortable life feel suddenly hollow. "What's her prognosis?" he asked. "With proper rest and nutrition, she should recover fully," but Dr. Kim hesitated. The social worker mentioned that if she can't demonstrate stable housing and income, the children might be placed elsewhere. Alexander's jaw tightened. After everything Sarah had sacrificed, after the love he had witnessed between her and the twins, the system threatened to tear them apart again. Alexander's penthouse apartment had never felt so vast or so empty as it did that night, with Maya and Lucas sleeping in his guest room. He had called in favors to arrange temporary custody, promising the overwhelmed social worker that he would ensure their safety until Sarah recovered. Now, standing at his floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city, he wondered what he had gotten himself into. The twins had been quiet during the ride home, overwhelmed by the luxury of his building, the marble lobby, the elevator that rose so high they said their ears popped. But they had also been brave, accepting this strange turn in their lives with the resilience that had kept them alive on the streets. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his assistant's number, but he let it go to voicemail. For the first time in years, his corporate empire seemed less important than the two small souls sleeping down the hall. He had built his success on calculated risks and strategic thinking, but nothing had prepared him for the way his heart had cracked open at the sight of them in that alley. Alexander made himself coffee and settled into his study, surrounded by awards and photographs from various charity galas. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had donated millions to children's causes over the years, attending fundraisers and writing checks, but he had never looked into the actual face of childhood poverty until tonight. His laptop screen glowed as he began researching foster care laws, hospital billing procedures, and the complex web of bureaucracy that surrounded vulnerable children. If he was going to help Sarah keep her family together, he needed to understand the system that had already failed them too many times. By dawn, he had a plan. It was risky, possibly foolish, and would require him to step far outside his comfort zone. But as the first light of morning painted his apartment gold, Alexander Kim made a decision that would change all their lives forever. Sarah's eyes fluttered open to unfamiliar surroundings, crisp white sheets, the antiseptic smell of hospital air, and the soft beeping of monitors. Panic hit her immediately, sharp and breathless. The twins. Where were Maya and Lucas? She tried to sit up, but her body protested, weak from days of unconsciousness. A nurse appeared at her bedside, gentle but firm in pushing her back down. "The children," Sarah croaked, her voice rough from disuse. "Maya and Lucas. Where are they?" "They're safe," the nurse assured her. "A gentleman has been caring for them. He's been here every day, waiting for you to wake up." Before Sarah could process this information fully, the door opened and a man entered. Tall, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, with kind eyes that seemed oddly familiar. He carried coffee and what looked like a bag of pastries, moving with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to hospitals. "Miss Chen," Alexander said softly, setting down his offerings. "I'm Alexander Kim. I found Maya and Lucas 3 days ago." 3 days. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She had lost 3 days. 3 days when anything could have happened to the children she had sworn to protect. But they were safe. This stranger said they were safe. "I don't understand," she whispered, studying his face. There was something there, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his expensive suit and obvious wealth. "Why would you—" "Because they needed help," Alexander said simply, "and because anyone who would sacrifice their own health to care for 2 children who aren't legally theirs deserves help in return." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She had been too exhausted to cry for months. "They are mine," she said fiercely. "Not by blood, but they're mine." Alexander smiled, and Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. "I have a proposition for you," Alexander said, pulling a chair closer to Sarah's bedside. "But first, I need you to know that I've been taking care of Maya and Lucas and their remarkable children. The love they have for you, the way they speak about you, it's clear that you've given them something precious." Sarah studied his face, searching for ulterior motives. She had learned to be wary of kindness from strangers, especially wealthy ones. But Alexander's eyes held only sincerity, and the fact that her children were safe spoke volumes about his character. "What kind of proposition?" she asked carefully. "I want to offer you a job," Alexander said, "a position that would provide stable income, health insurance and housing, something that would satisfy the social workers that you can provide for Maya and Lucas." Sarah's heart leaped, but she forced herself to remain cautious. "What kind of job? I don't have a college degree. I clean offices and serve coffee." "I need someone to manage the charitable foundation I'm establishing," Alexander said. "Someone who understands what it means to struggle, who knows firsthand the gaps in the system. Your experience matters more than any degree." The offer was too good to be true, and Sarah said as much. Alexander leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Miss Chen, Sarah, I've spent my entire adult life building wealth, but I've never felt as wealthy as I did watching Maya and Lucas sleep peacefully in my guest room, knowing they were safe and fed. You gave that to them every day, sacrificing your own well-being to do it. That's not something that can be taught." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again. "Why are you doing this?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "Because I know what it's like to be alone," he said finally. "And because some things matter more than profit margins and board meetings." 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in the doorway of her new apartment, watching Maya and Lucas explore their new bedrooms with wide-eyed wonder. The space was modest but beautiful, filled with natural light and furnished with care. Alexander had insisted it be close to good schools and parks, places where children could be children. "Sarah, look!" Lucas called out, his face pressed against the window. "There's a playground right across the street. And look at this," Maya said, running her hands over the books that filled a small shelf in the living room. "These are all in English and Korean." Sarah smiled, still struggling to believe this was real. The job at Alexander's foundation was challenging but fulfilling, allowing her to help other families navigate the system that had once seemed determined to tear hers apart. She had health insurance now, savings for the first time in years, and most importantly, the security that came with knowing Maya and Lucas would never again have to search through garbage bins for their next meal. Alexander appeared in the doorway, carrying bags of takeout from the twins' favorite restaurant. He had become a constant presence in their lives over the past 2 weeks, but Sarah was still learning to read the emotions that sometimes flickered across his carefully composed features. "I brought dinner," he said, his eyes meeting Sarah's across the room. "I thought we could celebrate your first week at the foundation." "Uncle Alexander!" Lucas launched himself at the tall man, who caught him easily. The title had emerged naturally, Maya and Lucas's way of acknowledging the role he had taken in their lives without being asked. Sarah watched the interaction, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Alexander Kim was unlike anyone she had ever met, powerful yet gentle, successful yet humble, and the way he looked at her sometimes made her forget how to breathe. Spring arrived early that year, painting Seoul in shades of pink and green as cherry blossoms bloomed throughout the city. Sarah had settled into her role at the foundation with a passion that surprised even her. Working with families in crisis, she found herself able to offer not just resources, but genuine understanding born from her own struggles. Alexander often worked late at the foundation office, claiming it was more efficient than his corporate headquarters. Sarah suspected it had more to do with their evening conversations over shared takeout, the way Maya and Lucas would curl up against him while he helped with homework, or the quiet moments when their eyes would meet across a room full of people and the world would seem to narrow to just the two of them. "You're falling in love with him," Maya announced one evening as they prepared dinner together. At 8 years old, she had developed an uncanny ability to read adult emotions. Sarah nearly dropped the knife she was holding. "Maya, it's okay," Maya continued matter-of-factly. "He loves you too. And Lucas and me, we can tell." Out of the mouths of babes. Sarah looked at this wise little girl who had been through more than most adults, who had learned to be cautious with trust but generous with love. If Maya approved, if Maya felt safe enough to hope for this kind of future, then perhaps Sarah could allow herself to hope too. That evening, Alexander arrived with flowers, not roses or anything grand, but cherry blossoms he had picked from the tree outside their building. It was such a simple gesture, but it spoke to the man she was coming to know. Someone who found beauty in everyday moments, who understood that the smallest kindnesses often meant the most. "These are beautiful," Sarah said, accepting the delicate branches. "Thank you." Their fingers brushed as she took them, and neither pulled away. The connection that had been building between them for months hummed in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Sarah was reviewing grant applications at the foundation. Her lawyer's voice was tight with concern as he delivered news that made her blood run cold. Maya and Lucas's biological uncle from America had surfaced, claiming he wanted to file for custody. Sarah's hands shook as she set down the phone. She had always known this was a possibility, but as months had passed and the children had settled into their new life, she had allowed herself to believe they were safe. Now, the specter of separation loomed again, threatening to destroy the family they had built. Alexander found her in her office an hour later, staring blankly at her computer screen, tears streaming down her face. He didn't ask questions, simply closed the door and pulled her into his arms, letting her cry against his chest while he rubbed soothing circles on her back. "Tell me," he said when her sobs had quieted. Sarah explained about the uncle, about the legal battle that was likely to come, about her fear that after everything they had been through, she might lose Maya and Lucas to someone who had never shown interest in them before. "He doesn't know them," she whispered fiercely. "He doesn't know that Lucas still has nightmares about the car accident, or that Maya pretends to be brave, but cries when she thinks no one is listening. He doesn't know that they've been through enough upheaval for 10 lifetimes. Alexander's jaw was tight with controlled anger. "We'll fight this," he said firmly. "I'll get the best family lawyers in the country. We'll document everything, your relationship with them, their stability here, their wishes." "Alexander, you don't understand. I'm nobody. He's their blood relative, and I'm just—" Sarah's voice broke. "You're their mother in every way that matters," Alexander said, cupping her face in his hands. "And I love you. All of you. We're going to fight for our family." The words hung in the air between them, finally spoken after months of dancing around their feelings. The courtroom was sterile and intimidating, filled with people in suits who would decide the fate of 2 children based on legal precedents and blood relations. Sarah sat beside her lawyer, Alexander's hand a steady presence on her shoulder, while Maya and Lucas waited in a child-friendly room down the hall with a social worker. James Morrison, the twins' uncle, was exactly what Sarah had expected. Successful, confident, and completely oblivious to the emotional needs of the children he claimed to want. He spoke of providing them with opportunities and advantages, of private schools and trust funds, painting a picture of material wealth that her modest life couldn't match. But when the judge asked to speak with Maya and Lucas privately, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. These children had found their voices over the past year, had learned to articulate their needs and feelings in ways that broke her heart with their maturity. The weight felt eternal. Alexander paced the hallway like a caged tiger, his usual composure cracked by the possibility of losing the family he had come to cherish. Sarah found herself praying to any deity that might be listening, bargaining with the universe for just this one miracle. When Maya and Lucas emerged from the judge's chambers, their faces were solemn but determined. Maya walked straight to Sarah and climbed into her lap, while Lucas attached himself to Alexander's side like a barnacle. "We told her the truth," Maya whispered against Sarah's neck. "We told her about the pancakes and the bedtime stories and how Uncle Alexander taught me to ride a bike. We told her we want to stay with our real family." The judge returned to the courtroom, her expression unreadable. She looked at the assembled adults, then at the children who had pressed close to Sarah and Alexander, forming a protective circle of love that spoke louder than any legal argument. "In matters of custody," she began, "the court must consider what is in the best interests of the children involved." The words, "custody granted to Sarah Chen," rang through the courtroom like church bells, beautiful and life-changing. Sarah felt her knees give out, caught by Alexander's strong arms as relief flooded through her system. Maya and Lucas cheered, their joy infectious enough to make even the stern bailiff smile. The judge had been moved by the children's testimony, by the clear evidence of the loving, stable home Sarah had provided, and by the comprehensive support system Alexander had helped establish around them. The uncle's financial advantages couldn't compete with the deep emotional bonds that had been forged through shared struggles and unconditional love. Outside the courthouse, Alexander lifted both children into the air simultaneously, spinning them around while they shrieked with laughter. Sarah watched through happy tears, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. They had won. They were officially, legally, a family. "Marry him," Maya said later that evening as they celebrated with ice cream and Alexander's presence at their kitchen table. She said it with the same matter-of-fact tone she used to announce that it was time for homework or that Lucas had hidden vegetables in his napkin. Alexander choked on his ice cream, while Sarah turned approximately the color of a ripe tomato. "Maya," Sarah started, but Lucas interrupted. "We already talked about it," he said seriously. "We want Uncle Alexander to be our dad for real, and we want you to be happy, Sarah, really happy." Sarah looked at Alexander, who was watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest tight. Here was a man who had walked into their lives like a guardian angel, who had fought for them, sacrificed for them, loved them unconditionally. Here was a man who made pancakes on Sunday mornings and knew that Lucas liked his crusts cut off and Maya needed extra hugs after nightmares. "Is that a proposal?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's smile could have lit up the entire city. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the garden of Alexander's family estate, wearing a simple white dress that made her feel like a princess. The ceremony was small and intimate, just a few close friends, their lawyer who had become a friend, Mrs. Park from the restaurant where they had shared their first meal together, and most importantly, Maya and Lucas, who served as ring bearers with the solemnity of children who understood the significance of the moment. Alexander looked handsome in his navy suit, but it was the expression in his eyes that took Sarah's breath away. Pure love, gratitude, and joy. When the officiant asked if they would promise to love and cherish each other, Maya and Lucas shouted, "Yes!" before either adult could answer, causing the small gathering to erupt in laughter. "We, Sarah, Alexander, Maya, and Lucas, promise to be a family forever," Alexander said, departing from the traditional vows to include the children who had brought them together. Through good times and challenges, through pancakes and bedtime stories, through homework and adventures, We promise to love each other unconditionally." As they exchanged rings, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with two hungry children searching through garbage bins on the coldest night of the year, and it had led to this moment of perfect happiness. Sometimes the most beautiful families were the ones you chose, the ones you fought for, the ones you built from love and determination rather than blood and tradition. The reception was held in the same garden, with string lights twinkling overhead and the sound of children's laughter filling the air. Maya and Lucas danced with reckless abandon, their joy infectious and pure. Alexander spun Sarah around the makeshift dance floor, and she marveled at how perfectly she fit in his arms, how right this all felt. As the evening wound down and the twins fell asleep in Alexander's lap, Sarah looked around at their chosen family and smiled. They had found each other in the darkest moment, and together they had created something beautiful and lasting, a love story that had saved them all.